We've all heard that all too familiar chorus a time or two in our lives. Whether you've grown up in church or have minimal interaction, you probably know it all the same. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was once lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. The words to this powerful hymn can sometimes become too familiar when we get into repetitive mode, but when you really contemplate the message the writer is trying to convey, it can be a powerful and humbling moment of realization. For those of us who would call ourselves Christians, there was once a time in our lives where we were spiritually blind to the truth, lost in the ways and philosophies of this world, void of hope and peace. Then, God did something miraculous, something that defies human logic or understanding. He offered us grace. Grace that brought us light when we were trapped in darkness. Grace that brought us comfort and peace when we were surrounded by fear and unrest. Grace which broke the chains of sin and brought us into the forgiveness and love of the Father. It was truly an act of amazing grace in its truest form. A few years ago, I went to a college football game on a cold fall night. And around halftime, my wife and I came to the realization that we completely forgot to take care of our dog for the entire day, and that it would be several hours before we would get home for the night as well. After discussing it, I decided that I would just walk back to our car and begin heading home, as it was only a few miles away and not a big deal to do it. I began my trek in the dark of the night, at first traveling along the lighted streets, and I came to a crossroads where I could go left or right. In this moment, I felt very confident that I remembered the way that we went to get there, and so I went left, beginning to run as I realized it was getting colder and colder. As I ran, I passed by a few college students who began to mock me for some unknown reason, saying things like, "Run, Forrest, run," and "better get there quick." I didn't realize it at the moment, but I was beginning to go further and further down the path, and suddenly this thought dawned on me more and more. I was lost. Now, I truly believe that Satan can use others sometimes to kick you when you're down, to mock you, to discourage and frustrate us, to keep us in our sin or discourage us in our faith. In that moment, I was very confident that I could figure it out on my own, and staying committed to my stubbornness to continue going down the path I had chosen, believing that I was right the first time. At the time, I thought it was just a random occurrence, but now I can see that the devil was mocking me, that I was slowly putting myself into a more and more desperate situation, becoming more fearful and vulnerable the further down the path I went. As I continued down the road in just pitch black darkness, I reached for my phone hoping that it would provide a much needed light source, but to my utter disbelief, it had died due to the cold weather freezing up the battery, and I was, in actuality, alone. No cars, no houses, businesses, or light sources to use for reference, just me and my racing mind. I began to think of myself, what do I do? I thought for sure this was the way I needed to go, but nothing looks familiar. Do I turn around? Do I continue going forward? How can I get out of this situation? Now, when we experience times in our lives where we feel that we are at our wit's end or in a desperate situation, we often tend to just grasp at straws, looking for anything to put our hope in. For me, I was just looking for a house with their lights on, a familiar-looking road sign, or even a fast food joint with a phone that I could use to bring me hope. Though I'm embarrassed to admit it, it wasn't until all hope of finding an easy solution to my problem ran out that I finally realized where my true hope was to be found in. Romans 8:24-25 says, "For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience." We're taught throughout the New Testament that the Holy Spirit resides within us and that he is our source of comfort, joy, and peace. But this truth can be difficult to take to heart sometimes because it requires faith to believe that that's true. Faith that says, I can't do this in my own strength. I require the strength that only God can provide me. I can't rely on the things that I can see or the paths that my feet can tread. I need the power from the Holy Spirit who is unseen to make it through this. At this point, I had run out of options and hope, and I couldn't think of anything else to do other than just pray out of desperation. I remember saying, "Lord, I don't know how I can get out of this situation, but I know that you have the power to do so. So I'm asking for a miracle that only you can provide. Otherwise, I'm not getting out of this situation." I continued to run, feeling out of breath, cold and weak, not feeling like I had any other choice but to just continue running. Out of desperation, I pulled out my phone again and attempted to boot it up, and to my amazement, it worked. Thinking quickly, I turned the flashlight on and began to wave it around like a madman anytime a car would pass by every couple minutes, hoping that anyone would stop. After a few cars, I was relieved to see a car begin to slow down and stop in front of me. An older couple was in the car and asked me if I needed help. Out of breath and overwhelmed by the situation, I attempted to tell them that I was lost and that I needed a ride to my car, or at the very least the ability to make a phone call. And to my amazement, the couple agreed to give me a ride. After describing the area I had parked to them, they mentioned that I had gone the complete opposite way and I had run nearly 4 miles towards the country roads instead of going the shorter 2-mile trek I would have had to go had I gone right instead of left at the crossroads. After thanking them multiple times, I offered them all the cash I had at the time in my wallet as a reward for their kind deed, but they refused and stated that they were just glad to help someone who needed help. When I finally got in my car, I had a minute to breathe. I just began crying as I realized that I had just received the miracle that I had prayed for, and that God truly did come to my rescue in that situation. Against all odds, I had made it out. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. The reality of my situation was that if I had continued to rely on the hope of this world and in myself to get out of the jam, I would have simply just continued to run in the opposite direction, believing that I could just outrun my problem and that I could find a solution in my own strength. It wasn't until I came to the realization that I needed God's help in my life and that I was able to receive the blessing of grace and peace. Similarly, we can reach our own situations of desperation in our lives, where we reach a crossroads where we can turn one of 2 ways, and our pride would tell us to go one way and just do it in our own strength. I truly believe that I knew where I was going, and despite all the warning signs, I continued to trust in myself instead. But God invites us to lay down our pride and seek after Him, not only in those times of desperation, but every day in our relationships, pursuits, and faith. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths." I challenge you today not to wait until you've lost all hope to turn to God, but to seek Him out first. He wants to help and extends that amazing grace to you, and it can be yours if you'll only ask for it first.